My father, Arthur Vance, was a man who built an empire from nothing but limestone, steel, and a refusal to lose. Growing up, I didn't see him as just a parent, he was an institution. But when I turned 16, a quiet cancer took him in less than 4 months. I was 19 when the real storm hit, and by then, the empire he built had been thoroughly invaded. After his funeral, the world changed overnight. My stepmother, Victoria, a woman who wore her sophistication like armor and treated everyone below her tax bracket as background noise, didn't waste a single day. She had married my father only 3 years before his passing. With her came her 20-year-old son, Julian. Julian was the kind of guy who lived in expensive custom suits paid for by my father's credit cards, masking his complete lack of talent with absolute arrogance. The day after the mourning period officially ended, Victoria called a meeting on the private rooftop terrace of the Vance estate. It was raining hard against the glass pavilion. I stood by the grand window, looking down at the dark Ohio streets, holding my breath. Victoria sat at the marble table, adjusting her diamond watch, while Julian stood beside her, checking his reflection in a silver tray. "Ethan," Victoria began, her voice smooth, calm, and utterly devoid of warmth. "Your father was a generous man, but he was also a realist. He understood that a multi-million-dollar logistics company requires an experienced hand, a mature hand. She didn't hand me a copy of the will. Instead, she slid a single piece of paper across the cold marble. It was a legal notification stating that, under a revised codicil signed by my father just 2 weeks before his death, 90% of the Vance holdings, the estate, and the primary liquid accounts were transferred directly to her and Julian. My share was a small trust fund, barely enough to cover a standard college tuition, and a stipulation that I had exactly 30 days to clear my belongings from the family home. "We aren't trying to be cruel," Julian added, a thin smile forming on his lips as he straightened his navy blue jacket. "But Vance Logistics needs leadership. You're 19, Ethan. You're a student. Go buy a small pickup truck, find a nice apartment downtown, and leave the corporate decisions to the adults." I didn't yell. I didn't slam my hands on the table. My father had taught me that anger is a luxury of the weak. Data and leverage are what actually win arguments. I looked at the paper, then at Victoria's cold, unchanging eyes. I knew my father. I knew he had spent his entire life preparing me to take over the company. He would never have signed this codicil willingly, not unless he was completely out of his mind from the heavy medical treatments in his final days. "I understand," I said quietly, folding the notification and sliding it into my pocket. "Good," Victoria said, already turning her attention back to her laptop. "The moving trucks will be here on Thursday. Please ensure your things are boxed by then." 2 days later, while packing the final boxes in my father's old private study, I noticed something hidden behind the bottom shelf of his heavy oak bookcase. It was a secret floor compartment he had built years ago. Inside, there was no money or gold. There was only a sleek, dark metallic box with a heavy security padlock, and inside his old silver pocket watch case, I found the antique brass key that opened it. When the lock clicked open, I didn't find a hidden stash of cash. I found a thick sealed document folder from the Midwest Genetic Laboratory, dated just 1 month before my father passed away, alongside an encrypted black USB drive. I opened the folder, and as my eyes scanned the official legal documents, the room around me seemed to go completely silent. It wasn't a corporate financial ledger. It was a comprehensive DNA paternity test profile that my father had secretly ordered. The report showed 2 columns of data. One belonged to my father, Arthur Vance. The other belonged to Julian. And at the bottom, stamped in official red ink, were the words that turned Victoria's entire universe into a fragile house of cards. Probability of paternity, 0.00%. Biological relationship, impossible. My father had found out. He knew Julian wasn't his biological son, and he had been gathering evidence right before the illness took him. But there was something else on that USB drive, a recorded conversation between Victoria and her personal attorney, discussing how to alter the medical power of attorney forms while my father was heavily sedated in the hospital. They thought they had won. They thought they had successfully pushed the quiet 19-year-old kid out onto the street with nothing but a backpack. But as a Vance, I knew exactly how to play the long game. I wasn't going to hire a standard lawyer and file a quiet lawsuit. The annual Vance Logistics High Society Gala was happening in exactly 2 weeks at the Plaza Hotel Ballroom. Every major investor, every board member, and the entire local press would be in that room to watch Victoria and Julian officially announce their new leadership. I locked the metallic box, placed the USB drive in my pocket, and smiled for the first time in months. They wanted to show the world their new legacy. I was going to make sure the world saw exactly what that legacy was built on. The days leading up to the annual Vance Logistics High Society Gala felt like walking through a minefield, where I was the only one who knew where the explosives were hidden. Victoria and Julian treated me like a ghost in my own home, completely ignoring my presence as they spent hours in the main pavilion, organizing catering and finalizing guest lists. They had already hired an elite corporate branding agency to design a massive digital presentation that would display Julian's name across the giant LED screens in the main ballroom, signaling the official transition of power. I watched them from the upper gallery, holding the antique brass key in my pocket, feeling the cold weight of the genetic lab report resting securely against my chest. I didn't spend my time crying or staring at the walls. Instead, I used my late father's private secure network to dig deeper into the files on the encrypted black USB drive, uncovering a paper trail that showed exactly how Victoria had systematically transferred small but crucial amounts of capital from our logistics accounts into a private offshore fund weeks before my father fell ill. She wasn't just planning to steal the leadership, she was planning to completely hollow out the company, leaving nothing but a shell for the board of directors, while she and Julian retired to a luxury estate in Florida. But her biggest mistake was assuming that a 19-year-old university student wouldn't know how to read a corporate balance sheet or understand the operational structure of a high-tech audio-visual system in a 5-star hotel. On the Monday before the event, I quietly Hendersoned my remaining bags and moved them out into the back of an old, reliable black pickup truck that belonged to my college roommate, leaving the Vance mansion without saying a single word to my stepfamily. I took a local transit bus downtown, sitting by the rain-streaked window as the city lights blurred into long golden streaks. My mind entirely focused on the layout of the Plaza Hotel ballroom where the gala was set to take place. I knew that trying to fight Victoria in a standard probate court would take months, allowing her high-priced lawyers to freeze my father's assets and eventually tied me up in endless litigation until I ran out of money. The only way to stop an empire from being stolen was to destroy the thieves in front of the very market that gave them their value, exposing the absolute truth before a single vote could be cast by the board of directors. I walked into the First National Bank downtown, descending into the cold, reinforced steel safety deposit vault under the bright halogen lamps, and officially deposited copies of the DNA paternity test and the audio recordings into a secure box that only I could access, ensuring that if anything happened to my phone or laptop, the evidence remained completely untouched. With the legal backup secured, I reached out to Marcus, a 45-year-old former head of security for Vance Logistics, who had been abruptly dismissed by Victoria the very day my father entered the hospital. Marcus was a towering, quiet professional who had served my father for 12 years, a man who knew every service hallway and back entrance of the Plaza Hotel because his team had handled the security logistics for the company gala for the last decade. We met in a dimly lit, carpeted corridor near the hotel's back service bays, away from the glittering chandeliers of the main lobby where the early decorations were already being hung. Marcus looked at the genetic report I handed him, his serious face hardening as he realized exactly how his former boss had been manipulated in his final hours, his loyalty to my father instantly turning into a quiet, calculated determination to help me execute my plan. He reached into his pocket and handed me an unprogrammed master electronic keycard to the hotel's primary AV control suite, a secure room located directly behind the massive stage of the main ballroom, where the central video servers and audio consoles were managed. The current tech team answers to Victoria, Marcus told me in a low-level voice, but they take a scheduled dinner break exactly 40 minutes before the main presentation starts, leaving the main console on automated backup. That is your window, Ethan. I thanked him, concealing the keycard inside my charcoal black suit jacket, knowing that the stage was officially set for a corporate execution that Victoria and Julian would never see coming until the screens turned dark. Dot, The 2 weeks leading up to the gala passed in a blur of quiet preparation and intense calculation, as I balanced my university lectures with nightly meetings at Marcus's small garage on the edge of town, where we carefully mapped out every second of the upcoming event. Marcus had managed to quietly contact 3 former technician leads who had also been pushed out by Victoria, and together we engineered a deep digital override that would seamlessly hook my father's encrypted USB data straight into the hotel's central server matrix, without triggering any automated security alerts from the current AV staff. I spent hours reviewing the stolen audio recordings on that drive, feeling a cold fire ignite in my chest every time I heard Victoria's smooth, detached voice explaining to her lawyer exactly how they would use the forged medical codicil to completely lock me out of the logistics empire before my father's body was even cold in the ground. I didn't waste a single moment on anger or self-pity, because I knew that in the high-stakes world of corporate logistics, the person who strikes first with absolute data always controls the narrative, and Victoria's biggest structural vulnerability was her own immense vanity. She had invited over 400 of the Midwest's most prominent investors, supply chain tycoons, and local political figures to the Plaza Hotel ballroom, completely convinced that this night would be her grand coronation, where she would introduce Julian as the undisputed heir to the Vance family legacy. When the night of the gala finally arrived, the heavy Ohio rain returned, washing over the limestone arches of the luxury hotel as hundreds of black town cars pulled up to the grand entrance, spilling wealthy guests in silk evening gowns and custom tuxedos into the glittering golden warmth of the main lobby. I arrived early, walking through the back service entrance under the cover of a standard worker's raincoat, before changing into my tailored charcoal black suit inside a private basement locker room that Marcus had unlocked for me using an old master keycard. The hotel's main ballroom was a massive cavernous space draped in white velvet and illuminated by 12 massive crystal chandeliers that cast a brilliant amber glow over row after row of round tables topped with premium champagne and silver centerpieces. From my hiding spot in the narrow shadow of the heavy stage curtains, I watched Victoria glide through the crowd like an absolute monarch, her dark brown bob-cut hair perfectly styled, her expensive designer dress trailing behind her as she shook hands with our primary banking partners. Julian stood right by her side, holding a crystal glass, his face practically glowing with the unearned confidence of a man who believed he had successfully stolen a multi-million-dollar life's work from a quiet 19-year-old kid. They were completely oblivious to the fact that exactly 40 minutes before the main presentation was set to begin, Marcus had quietly walked past the hotel service corridor and given the signal to the current AV crew that their premium catered dinners had arrived in the staff room downstairs. The moment the control room cleared, leaving the massive server consoles on automated backup, I slid through the heavy soundproof door, using the electronic keycard Marcus had given me, the cool, air-conditioned air of the tech booth smelling faintly of static electricity and high-end electronics. My hands were perfectly steady as I stepped up to the primary video wall console, my eyes scanning the multicolored monitors showing live feeds of the roaring crowd outside, before I slipped the sleek black custom USB drive directly into the main server rack. The screen in front of me flashed blue as my father's private encryption software bypassed the hotel's firewalls, instantly locking the master display queue and replacing Victoria's beautifully designed corporate presentation with my own multi-layered high-definition data file. I checked the audio sync twice, ensuring that the voice recordings of her conspiracy would blast cleanly through every single line array speaker in the ballroom before setting the entire system on a hard digital delay tied directly to the master microphone switch on the main stage podium. As I stepped back out into the dark service hallway, the heavy double doors of the ballroom officially closed, and the lights inside began to slowly dim, signaling to the 400 elite guests that the formal presentation was about to begin. I took my place at the very back of the hall, blending into the shadows near the entrance doors, watching Victoria and Julian confidently ascend the stairs of the grand stage under the blinding spotlight, completely unaware that the house of cards they built was about to face a total devastating collapse. Standing at the back of the magnificent grand ballroom, I watched as the giant crystal chandeliers dimmed into a deep violet glow, and the chatter of the 400 high society guests gradually died down to a sharp, expectant hush. Victoria stepped up to the mahogany podium on the main stage with absolute elegance, her diamond necklace reflecting the brilliant wash of the stage spotlights as she smiled at the row of corporate cameras and adjusted the microphone. Julian stood exactly 2 paces behind her, puffing his chest in his premium wool tuxedo and running a hand over his watch cufflink, looking like a king who was about to inherit the world without ever earning a single dollar of it. Victoria leaned into the microphone, her voice projecting through the massive house speakers with perfect calculated warmth, as she began thanking the board of directors, the global supply line partners, and the political representatives for gathering here to honor my late father's grand legacy. She spoke with rehearsed sadness about Arthur Vance's unexpected passing, but her tone quickly shifted to a sharp, triumphant rhythm as she opened her tablet device and announced that Vance Logistics was entering a bold new era of expansion under a new undisputed bloodline. "My husband built this empire for the future of his family," Victoria proclaimed proudly, gesturing toward Julian with a sweeping motion of her diamond-ringed hand. "And tonight, it is my highest privilege to officially introduce the new CEO and majority shareholder of Vance Logistics, a true Vance by blood and by spirit, Julian Vance." The audience broke into polite applause, and Julian stepped forward to take the center slot behind the podium, completely unaware that his digital presentation cue was tied directly to my father's custom override protocol. Julian gripped the sides of the podium, flashing a bright, confident smile at the investors, and nodded toward the tech booth at the back of the hall for the massive multi-panel LED screens behind him to light up with his corporate roadmap profile. The moment his finger pressed the master wireless clicker, the screens didn't flash with the gold company logo or the financial growth graphs that Victoria's branding team had spent months creating. Instead, the entire system went completely black for 3 agonizing seconds, causing a tense murmur to ripple through the front rows of the audience, while Victoria looked back over her shoulder with a sudden, sharp tightening in her jaw. Suddenly, the screens burst into bright, clinical white light, revealing a massive high-definition scan of a certified laboratory document with a bold red digital seal reading Midwest Genetic Laboratory, Official DNA, Paternity Evaluation Report. The names Arthur Vance and Julian Vance were displayed in sharp black text at the top of the screen next to 2 massive columns of complex genetic markers, leading straight down to the heavy handwritten signature of the chief medical expert. Before anyone in the room could even process the visual data, the main line array sound system of the ballroom cut off Julian's active microphone and replaced it with a roaring, crystal-clear audio file that blasted through every corner of the ballroom. It was Victoria's distinct, sophisticated voice, but it was completely stripped of its public warmth, sounding cold, hurried, and desperately clinical as it filled the room. "We need the signature on the codicil before the second sedation dose wears him out completely." Victoria's recorded voice echoed sharply over the stunned crowd, followed by the deep, muffled reply of her personal attorney confirming that the paperwork was ready for the hospital room. "If the kid finds Arthur's original field files, the whole probate will freeze, so make sure his security access is canceled by morning," the recording continued, laying bare every single second of the conspiracy to the entire board of directors. The ballroom descended into an absolute terrifying silence as the audio file played its final, incriminating loop, and the massive text at the bottom of the DNA document flashed on the screens with irreversible data showing a paternity probability of 0.0%. Julian's face turned an ash-gray color under the harsh stage lighting, his hands trembling so violently against the wooden podium that his champagne glass slipped off the edge and shattered on the polished floor below. Victoria spun around, her eyes widening in pure panic as she stared at her own recorded betrayal playing on the walls, her sophisticated composure completely disintegrating into a look of raw, unadulterated fear. She screamed at the empty wings of the stage for the technicians to kill the power to the displays, but the automation code was completely hard-locked into the main hotel grid, preventing anyone from stopping the presentation until the entire file reached its final conclusion. I stepped out from the deep shadows of the back entrance doors, walking calmly down the main carpeted aisle under the quiet gaze of 400 elite guests who were turning around in utter shock and disbelief. Every board member, every banking partner, and every shipping magnate watched me as I walked up toward the grand stage, my expression completely neutral, my posture straight, showing the absolute quiet power that my father had spent his entire life training me to possess. The loud clicking of my leather shoes against the polished marble floor of the center aisle was the only sound echoing through the massive, suffocatingly quiet ballroom as I made my way toward the grand stage under the stunned stares of 400 prominent logistics investors and local leaders. Victoria's elite bodyguards moved forward to block the stairs, but Marcus stepped out from the side wings with a team of official hotel security and a certified notary, instantly freezing her enforcement team in their tracks with a cold, professional look that made it clear they no longer held any real authority in this building. I ascended the wooden steps calmly, my eyes locked onto Julian, whose expensive tuxedo now looked like a costume on an actor who had completely forgotten his lines as he clutched the podium to stop his knees from buckling under the harsh glare of the center spotlights. I reached the microphone, pulled the certified laboratory DNA profile and the original corporate registration file from my charcoal black jacket, and laid them flat onto the mahogany wood, right next to his spilled champagne glass, before looking directly out into the crowd at the board of directors. Legacy isn't something you can forge in a locked hospital room, and it's certainly not something you can buy with someone else's credit cards, I said, my voice sounding incredibly level, clear, and absolute as it projected through the high-end house speakers. My father, Arthur Vance, spent his entire life building this logistics network on a foundation of data, precision, and complete operational transparency, and he left behind a final directive that ensures this company remains in the hands of a Vance by blood, not by fraud. The primary board members in the front row stood up immediately, demanding an immediate vote of non-confidence against Victoria's leadership based on the undeniable audio proof of medical forgery that was still displaying its incriminating loops on the massive screens behind us. Victoria tried to reach for her designer clutch bag to retrieve her phone, her hands shaking so violently that her diamond bracelet unclasped and shattered a glass centerpiece on the front table. But, right on cue, the massive double doors at the back of the Plaza Ballroom swung wide open. 2 uniformed Ohio police officers and a plainclothes corporate fraud investigator walked down the carpeted aisle with perfect steady steps, their metallic badges flashing under the amber chandeliers as they approached the main stage. The investigator stepped up to the podium, reviewed the certified lab documentation and the financial transaction logs showing Victoria's illegal capital transfers to the Florida Offshore Fund, before turning toward the trembling 20-year-old on the stage. Julian's absolute arrogance completely vanished as the cold steel handcuffs clicked tightly around his wrists right in front of the local press cameras, his face turning an ash-white color as he was quietly led down the stage steps without saying a single word. Victoria screamed at her personal attorney, who was already quietly collecting his briefcase and walking toward the emergency exit doors to avoid being pulled into the massive corporate conspiracy indictment that would eventually strip them of every dollar they had stolen. I watched them go, not with anger or a look of petty triumph, but with the cold, calculated peace of a man who had successfully audited a broken ledger and restored the balance of his family's life's work. A year after the final probate court ruling successfully voided the forged codicil and returned 95% of the Vance empire back into my control, I didn't spend my time sitting inside the massive limestone mansion or bragging about my fortune on social media. I used a significant portion of the liquidated Florida assets to establish the Arthur Vance Academic Foundation, a scholarship program designed to help independent university students build their own tech startups and logistics ventures without being pushed out by corporate corruption or entitled family members. I stood outside the beautiful brick campus on a bright autumn morning, the golden sunlight filtering through the trees as I threw my backpack into the cabin of a classic dark pickup truck, my roommates laughing as we loaded the last of our moving boxes. I had chosen to live in a modest apartment downtown, close to my logistics headquarters, focusing entirely on expanding my father's global supply chain network, using the absolute precision and quiet discipline he had trained me to maintain since I was a kid. Sometimes the most devastating revenge you can ever inflict on the people who try to destroy you isn't making them suffer through loud arguments or public shouting matches on the street. It's simply letting the absolute data of the truth do the work for you while you continue building the empire they thought they could take. If you were in my position, would you have exposed the conspiracy at the High Society Gala or handled it through a quiet legal suit? Tell me in the comments below where you are watching from tonight, and don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe so you never miss another story of sweet calculated justice.